I want to talk about our topic for today, which is on Narcotics Anonymous, NA, which is a proven program of recovery. And the reason we elected to do this was, there were a lot of good reasons. One is that we have a tremendous NA community of support right here in Washtenaw County. But the other reason I wanted to do it, besides that Rhett Reyes reached out to me with the idea, and Rhett will explain his role in the community, but he's a part of the sobriety court in Ypsilanti. And when Rhett reached out to me about this, what resonated with me is it harkened me back to 5 years ago when I was struggling with trying to find help for my son. And I was told by very prominent healthcare professionals that when you're putting together a recovery plan and working with people in that regard, make sure you focus on AA, because you're going to get a better sponsor there, and you're going to get better meetings, and you're not going to have people outside selling narcotics and drugs. And that scared me. I got to tell you that when I have someone like that, who I was talking to that many years ago, sharing that with me, it really put the idea in my mind to run the other way. And what I learned in the 4 years hence is that there is no silver bullet to recovery. And what works for Rhett or for Mary Ann or for Chris or Les or anybody on this Zoom meeting might not work for someone else. And so for those reasons, I thought that when Rhett reached out to me, that it would be beneficial to give a forum to Narcotics Anonymous. And so that's what we're going to discuss today. And we're going to start off with Chris Budnick, who heads up an incredible organization in Raleigh, North Carolina, by the name of Healing Transitions. And Chris, I want you to talk just briefly about that, but Chris is going to talk, once he talks about Healing Transitions, he's going to talk about how NA was conceived, that its roots are deeply entrenched in AA. And he's going to give a really good overview on that. And then from there, we've got 4 people from the community that we share, Crystal, Marianne, Rhett, and Les, who are all a part of the vibrant NA community in Washtenaw County, who are going to share their stories and why NA resonated with them. So with that, Chris, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? Like I said, first briefly talk about Healing Transitions, what it's about, and then you can dive right into your PowerPoint.
Thank you, Mario. My name is Chris Budnick, and I work for a nonprofit here in Raleigh, North Carolina, serving homeless, uninsured, and underserved adults who have alcohol and other drug problems through overnight emergency shelter, non-medical detoxification, and a long-term peer-run recovery program, combined with a number of other recovery supports. And we've been in existence since 2001. And we're replicated after the Healing Place model in Louisville, Kentucky. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, and I'm excited that you guys are going to be able to meet in person in August. So I'm going to share my screen.
Chris, really, really briefly.
Yep.
How many, what is it, lunches, dinners, meals? How many a year do you serve up to people in need? In your
our kind of highest capacity year was 2019 before COVID hit. And that year we did just under 300,000 meals, averaged somewhere around 330 people per night between the two campuses. And we do this at no cost to the individual, and historically have operated at a cost of $37 per person per day.
So the only reason I wanted Chris to mention that is this is no small feat that they're doing in North Carolina, and that and we should be doing that here in Michigan. I don't know why we're not, but it's something I'm going to look into. I know this meeting is being recorded, and I just wanted to get that out there, that this man is doing a lot of great work in Raleigh. So with that, Chris, sorry, but go right ahead.
Thank you. So I've been in recovery since 1990, and I've been in the addiction recovery field since 1993. I have a real passion and interest in stories of recovery, and particularly around mutual aid. And so that's kind of the basis of the interest in this short presentation on the history of Narcotics Anonymous. As an overview, Narcotics Anonymous emerged with inspiration and influence of Alcoholics Anonymous during a heroin drug trend when there were few treatment and no community-based resources available, during a decade of increasingly harsh criminal justice responses to heroin addiction. And real importantly, I really want to emphasize this, at a time when society did not believe persons addicted to drugs other than alcohol could find recovery, best characterized by the expression, once an addict, always an addict. For a little bit of context, and this really kind of speaks to differences in the trajectories of individuals with alcoholism and individuals with other drug addiction. In 1914, the very significant piece of federal legislation called the Harrison Anti-Narcotic Act was passed. And it basically used registration and taxation to restrict the use of opiates and cocaine to legitimate medical purposes. Prior to this, it was accessible through catalogs, through drugstores, without prescription. And America went from uncontrolled access to access regulated by physicians. The Treasury Department enforced the Harrison Act and ruled that it was, that physicians couldn't maintain an addict on narcotics. And this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sided with the Treasury Department. And so it became a violation of the Harrison Act for a physician to prescribe morphine to an addict for purposes other than attempting to cure the habit. And so the consequence of this is that between 1918 and 1938, more than 25,000 physicians were indicted under the Harrison Act. 3,000 went to jail and 20,000 paid substantial fines. And as a result, physicians stopped treating addicted patients. And this was because there was simply too much liability attached to it. So we talk about seeing a branch in this kind of pathway where alcoholics kind of remain in a healthcare system to some degree, whereas individuals with other drug addiction really end up in the criminal legal system. One of the things that the Harrison Act did that said, if you violate the Harrison Act, you can be sentenced to federal prison. And so starting in 1915, there began a drastic increase in the number of addicts who were being incarcerated in federal prisons. And this actually created a problem for a number of the wardens who felt that having addicts in their prisons were actually disrupting the prisons. And so two of them lobbied for US Congress to establish 2 narcotic farms, and they did this in 1929. This was authorized. And in 1935, the narcotic farm in Lexington, Kentucky opens, and then 3 years later, one will open in Fort Worth, Texas. And what was interesting, it was run by the US Public Health Service hospital, but it was also a federal prison, so people could be sentenced there, or they could go there voluntarily. A couple of weeks before that opened was the fateful meeting of Dr. Bob and Bill W. Very briefly, Bill is in Akron and finding himself, having the obsession to drink, and he realizes that the only thing that can probably help him is talking to somebody else who could understand. Dr. Bob, up until that point, had not experienced the power of identification. said that he'd give him 15 minutes and they reportedly met for hours. And it's because Bill went there to talk about his own drinking, not to talk to Bob about Bob's drinking. And as Bill disclosed his own experience, Bob was able to find identification with it. So why the narcotic farm is important is this becomes ground zero for the transmission of what Bill and Bob discovered, for that idea to be transmitted to addicts. And a key figure in that is a guy named Dr. Tom M., who was a physician in Shelby. He'd been an alcoholic before developing a 12-year addiction to morphine. And in addition to being sentenced to the narcotic farm, you could go there as a volunteer. And so he voluntarily went there in 1939 to take, quote, the cure. While he was there, he was given a copy of the AA Big Book. And when he's released using that big book, he starts the first AA meeting in North Carolina. And he becomes the first known person to achieve sustained recovery from addiction to drugs in addition to alcohol through Alcoholics Anonymous. In June of 44, AA begins publishing The Grapevine. And it's through The Grapevine that addicts who are attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings discover their mutual presence. In just the third issue of the AA Grapevine, a Doc N submits a letter asking for a hopheads corner. And essentially what he says is that through the help of the higher power and my AA friends, I no longer take morphine. I realize I fear it in a way I've ceased fearing alcohol. If I could just share some experiences with some other hophead, I know it would be a big help. And among AA's thousands, I'm sure I'll find my fellows. So he's looking for somebody who can understand and he can identify with, and they can identify with him around his morphine addiction. And just the very next issue, the fourth issue, Dr. Tom, our friend from Shelby, responds, and he describes that in his group, they have a club of 5 men who have had many years of drug addiction, but who are finding complete freedom from drugs, and that their period of freedom varies from 5 months to 6 years. He goes on to say that I suggest that interesting the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in establishing an AA group at the United States Public Health Service Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. So he's essentially saying it'd be great to take this AA program and implement it at the narcotic farm where there's a bunch of addicts seeking recovery. In June of 44, a few months before these Grapevine articles were published, Houston S. gets sober through Alcoholics Anonymous in Montgomery, Alabama. He meets a man named Harry in his AA group, and Harry has a dual problem of alcohol and morphine addiction. Harry spent 27 months in Lexington. He'd stopped drinking, but he could not stop using morphine. Houston's job transfers him to Frankfort, Kentucky, near Lexington in September of 46. And remembering his friend Harry, Houston approaches Dr. Victor Vogel about starting a 12-step group there for addicts. And so on February 16, 1947, the first meeting of what's called Addicts Anonymous is held at the narcotic farm in Lexington. And so this is really kind of the first known adaptation of Alcoholics Anonymous's 12 steps to a problem other than alcohol. And it's significant because it sets in motion a series of efforts that will result in Narcotics Anonymous. In 1935, a gentleman named Danny C. is among the first patients admitted to the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in Lexington. In 1948, he begins attending the Addicts Anonymous meetings during his 7th admission. He goes back to New York City, begins attending Alcoholics Anonymous, returns in 1948 to Lexington for his 8th and final admission. And at that point says he came under the mentorship of Houston S., who inspired me to learn to hope and to have faith at long last. In April of 1949, Danny returns to New York City, and sometime this year, he starts the first community-based 12-step group for addicts. And he chooses to call it Narcotics Anonymous to avoid confusion of Addicts Anonymous with Alcoholics Anonymous. So the AA of Addicts Anonymous would be confusing with the AA of Alcoholics Anonymous. This version of Narcotics Anonymous is different from the NA that exists today for 2 primary reasons. One, they didn't use the 12 traditions and they had close affiliation with others. One of the ways that they had affiliation is they formed an advisory council. 2 notable members of that advisory council were Marty Mann, who's one of the first women to get into long-term recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous, and another, Dr. Marie Newswander. who would pioneer methadone maintenance treatment in the 60s with her partner, Dr. Vincent Dole. Now, I'm going to play an audio clip of a gentleman named Dr. Charles Budnick describing Narcotics Anonymous's early efforts in New York City. And again, I want to emphasize the context that society did not hold a belief that addicts could recover.
We were concerned when we learned that the local office of the Bureau of Narcotics was interrupting NA meetings at the Y and arresting everybody there on the ground that they were doing something wrong.
That was a common barrier that individuals who are addicted to drugs other than alcohol face, was the criminality around addiction and the way it was criminalized. And so in New York, Danny relied on non-addicts to help create support for having meeting spaces and to avoid harassment from law enforcement. One thing that Danny did do as a result of not adopting the 12 traditions is he was very public about his recovery and got a lot of press coverage about this. And why we think this is important is it began to put into the national consciousness that potentially addicts could recover too, just as others had been doing in Alcoholics Anonymous. Danny passed in '56 and Raleigh took over leadership of the group. She passes in '72, but without a foundation in the 12 traditions or an identified successor, Narcotics Anonymous folded in New York City following her death. The beginnings of NA as we know it today can be traced to 1950 when Jimmy Kay, a dual problem member, meaning that he had a problem with alcohol and other drugs, gets sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And alcoholics and what they would call bridge members, people who could be a bridge between the alcoholic and the addict because they shared both problems, were wrestling with how to help, quote, the straight addict while maintaining a focus on AA's primary purpose. And we'll listen to Jimmy discuss this.
We started long before NA was a reality, even in name. We grew from a need. We grew from a need that we found, those of us who were members had come into AA and found that we could recover in AA. We found out that many addicts were still going down the road of degradation and death. We thought it was right that we should try to do something.
So again, we hear that similar stuff around issues around identification. And so before the first official meeting of NA, which was October 5th, 1953, they were working on stuff. They were trying to come up with a way to create identification for the individual with addiction who was not finding that identification in AA. And we'll listen to Jimmy discuss that first meeting, how they got started, and what he is borrowing from is something that actually comes out of the Addicts Anonymous group. It's called Our Purpose.
And it says here, Narcotics Anonymous, Our Purpose. This is an informal group of drug addicts banded together to help one another renew their strength in remaining free of drug addiction. Our precepts are patterned after those of Alcoholics Anonymous, to which all credit is given and precedence is acknowledged. We claim no originality, but since we believe that the causes of alcoholism and addiction are basically the same, we wish to apply to our lives the truths and principles which have benefited so many otherwise helpless individuals. We believe that by so doing, we may regain and maintain our health and our sanity. It shall be the purpose of this group to endeavor to foster a means of rehabilitation for the addict and to carry a message of hope for the future to those who have become enslaved by the use of habit-forming drugs. Starting Monday night, October the 5th, 1953, each Monday thereafter, at 8:30 p.m., corner of Cantara and Clybourne, Sun Valley, California. I made a sign and we put it outside the front door of the church there. It said, NA meeting tonight, 8:30. And we opened the door for business, and we get about a dozen alcoholics in there who came to help us. And then a car would pull down around the corner, slowly, and they'd look at the sign, and then they split. Nobody trusted nobody, you know. They thought it was staked out. They wouldn't believe us when we told them there's no surveillance. And we weren't just too sure in the beginning ourselves.
So similar to what Danny experienced in New York City, the same thing was happening with Southern California and the early efforts of NA. Members of the narcotics squad standing outside meetings. We see you, you're making a fix, we'll get you. You don't do it this time, we'll get you again. Again, this belief that once an addict, always an addict, not believing that individuals could recover, not believing that people with addiction were worthy of recovery. A couple other things I just want to add is they created a booklet, small booklet, late 53, early 54. And there was a lot of debate over how to word step one. And up until this time, the adaptation of step one had been powerless over narcotics or powerless over drugs. Jimmy makes it powerless over addiction. And it's the first time, and it's a distinguishing feature of Narcotics Anonymous, where step one is about a condition, not a particular substance. And while it would have been easy, it seems, to have said drugs or narcotics, since 99% of the folks coming into NA in the 50s were heroin addicts, step one being worded this way has allowed for a lot of different addicts to come in based on changes in drug trends over the years. In 2022, there's over 76,000 weekly meetings in 143 countries. Literature has been translated into 56 different languages. Meetings are conducted in 91 different languages. And I'm just going to give a couple photos to kind of show Narcotics Anonymous around the world. This is a photo from the Ukrainian Regional Convention. This is actually a stadium full of NA members at the Iran Area Convention. First Saudi Arabian women's group. A picture of South Africa. First anniversary of an NA group in Korea. This is a NA meeting in Nepal. I'll conclude with just a couple things. There was an article written in 2016 with a number of well-tenured addiction and recovery professionals. And it raised the question of why is Narcotics Anonymous not receiving enough attention in terms of public, professional, and policy responses to the rising opioid epidemic. And I'm going to just address a couple misconceptions. And one misconception is that NA suffers from a lack of members in long-term recovery. The most recent membership survey in 2018 that had over 28,000 responses, the average recovery time from that survey was over 11 years of recovery. And another misconception that they talk about is that NA does not effectively serve women, ethnic minorities, or other historically disenfranchised groups. And NA is probably one of the most racially and ethnically diverse fellowships, with 70% Caucasian, 13% African American, 7% identifying as Hispanic, 4% is multiracial, 2% is Asian, 1% indigenous, and 1% other. The material I presented tonight is just an excerpt of a much larger presentation. There's a YouTube channel called Preserving the Message that contains history of Narcotics Anonymous as basic text and a more complete version of this presentation. I want to thank Mario and Washtenaw Fan for the opportunity to join you tonight and take part in this important conversation.
Thank you for that, Chris. And, you know, we've got a couple of notes in the chat feature in case anyone wants the Chris's presentation or a recording of this meeting. That'll be made available probably before the end of the week. The latest will be next week. So we typically include the recording of the meeting in our next the email blast, you know, the subsequent email blast that goes out twice a month to everybody on our listserv, which is now approaching, I think, a couple thousand people. So, and let me also let you know that not all of our guest speakers allow us to record and to stream live on Facebook, which is another thing we're doing right now. So I wanted to thank all the panelists for green lighting us to be able to record this and stream it live on Facebook. And we just had someone in the chat features that chat feature who said they want a recording. So to John, as long as you registered to attend this meeting, and obviously you did or you wouldn't be here, you will have access to that recording. Okay, so with that, what we wanted to do was to complement Chris's overview on the roots of NA with personal stories from people in our community who found benefit in what NA had to offer and who still attend AA meetings. So with that, I wanted to, and they're all going to share their stories. With that, I wanted to turn it over to Les for him to share his NA story and the value that that organization has brought to his life. Les?
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Chris. That was a very emotional presentation. Maybe not so much if somebody's not an addict in recovery, but it was to me. I'm surprised that I'm not all welled up here. You know, I first did my first substance, which was alcohol, when I was about 13, 14, and it seemed like the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And what the addiction was telling me and what was really happening were two different things. You know, I was going downhill fast, but you know, I was out there using for about 30 years. It went from alcohol to marijuana to cocaine to crack, and there was 14 years of treatment centers and 17 times in jail, and loss of the respect of my family, putting my family's life in danger on a regular basis, and caused me to walk out of my job with 23 years seniority at General Motors, to go on a 3-year crack attack. So, you know, I knew I wanted to get my job back. I thought I could shoot a move, been doing it all my life. And so I had the state put me up in a treatment facility here that was in our insane asylum. And lo and behold, there was 2 NA meetings a week there, and I'd never heard of NA before. And I got a glimmer of hope that people like me could find a way out. You know, I was still trying to shoot a move, still trying to learn how to use successfully. Just wanted to get my job back, wanted to get my house out of repossession, wanted to get the respect of my family back. Because my bottom was degradation. I heard that word come out of the presentation there. You know, I was degrading myself in my own eyes. I was doing stuff to me that I wouldn't allow anybody else to do. And I fell in love with the people in the fellowship. I fell in love with the literature. When I got clean, there was literature out there. I got clean in 1989. And we already had the basic text. And I think that really helped cement me into the program. But it kept me clean. And with being allowed to pick a higher power of my own understanding, just everything just started working. I got obsessed with you know, I made 4 or 5 meetings a day. I didn't have a job. It just became a lifestyle. It became family, we all bonded together. We did everything together, and my life just started getting better. I did get that job back because of the documentation of attending the meetings. That's how well respected they are.
Was that with General Motors, Les? Did
Yes,
you
it
go back
was.
You went back to General Motors, and you're a grandfather now. Is that correct?
I'm a great grandfather.
You're a great grandpa. Sorry about that.
Many
So-
times over.
Many times over.
Many times over. And, when I came home from my last treatment center, my youngest daughter at the time, I came home with a beer in my hand and a joint in my mouth. And she said, "Already, Dad? You're fucking using already?" And but that was the last time I used. I made it into that was the degradation that I was going through. I put them kids' lives in danger many times. And today, that youngest daughter is 50. All my kids are in their 50s now. I've been clean 33 years. We did save the house. I got my job back at General Motors. I walked out with 23 years seniority. I retired with 35 years seniority. Those are just financial benefits, the benefits from the love of my kids. There's not a time that we don't talk or chat or Facebook or something that we don't end it with "I love you." My kids' mother, she overdosed from this disease and died. 2 of my daughters have lost sons to this disease. One overdosed with Oxycontin and died. One died with a 0.38 alcoholism level. So they understand the struggles through everything, and that I can be there for their kids' kids when when their mother can't. So these are some of the heartwarming things that just happen because of Narcotics Anonymous getting and keeping me clean and giving me a life that the benefits of that kind of love that's shared, not just in my family, but throughout everybody I'm around. My work trusts me. I have the keys to the owner's house. I have the keys to his office, keys to his safe. And for an addict, that's a lot of love being shown, I haven't been paying attention to any time, but Narcotics Anonymous has taken me from a life of degradation to a life of love and respect, integrity, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, Les, thank you for sharing your story. And now I know whose email address has the prefix degradation.
Yep. And the
I was-
2189 is my clean date.
Okay, I didn't want to ask you guys who's degradation, but now I know. So Les, I would imagine your kids are so proud of you. Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. Awesome. Well, look, thank you for sharing your story. And now we're going to go to Mary Ann. Again, just reiterating that our panel of guest speakers all come from our community. So Mary Ann, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mario. I'm glad to be here tonight, and thanks everyone for your time. In the beginning, I didn't know I was an addict. I had lost my best friend and then my husband in car accidents. Both of them had died under the influence, and I picked up drugs to self-medicate. I had no idea at that time that I was an addict. I just didn't want to feel the pain. It wasn't until I was pulled over and there were drugs found in my car that a lawyer that I was sent to told me that it might be a really good idea that I attend some meetings so that I would be able to, take that meeting list into the courts with me when I was going to be sentenced. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous first, and I first went to a meeting in 1990. That's the year I got clean. And at that time, in the small town I lived in, there was only Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, but I had never heard of Narcotics Anonymous. So I was sent to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting where I talked about the only thing that I knew, and that was drugs. And they not so politely told me that I probably didn't belong in that fellowship and that there was probably a better fellowship for me. And after that meeting, I was given some meeting lists for Narcotics Anonymous, which we also had in our area. When I heard the story of other addicts in those meetings, I could relate. I didn't feel as worthless as when I walked in the doors. I mean, it took me a while to hold my head up because of the things that I had done in my addiction. After my kids lost their father, I had abandoned them. I continued to use. I had no idea that I was an addict, and there was this like imaginary line I crossed, and there came a day that I could no longer stop. I was caught in the grip of addiction. I had no idea I was an addict. I thought everybody would use like that if they were trying to, quelch that pain that I was in. I was trying not to feel, and it worked temporarily for me. But when I attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings and I heard other people who had almost lost their kids because my family was threatening to take my kids away, they had almost lost their kids too. And they were looking at a court case. They were unemployed. I was unemployable at that time. I was also introduced to the other parts of recovery meetings, like the 12 steps. The 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous that we received from Alcoholics Anonymous was a roadmap to recovery, I was told. And at first, I didn't think they applied to me. I was really just going to meetings. I really wasn't sure that I was an addict. I actually thought at that time that I was too young to be an addict. I was 25 years old. And I didn't know any other addicts. I came from a middle class family. I knew there were a few people in my family who had to go to a hospital to get dried out, but I didn't know any addicts. And I thought that I could stop on my own, and I found that I couldn't. So by being introduced to those steps of Narcotics Anonymous and the need for me to get a sponsor who I could relate to and who could guide me in my recovery, I was then introduced to the steps, the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous, and they became that roadmap to my recovery. And with those 12 steps, I've been able to apply those principles to other areas of my life as well. I've been able to stop smoking as a result of the 12 steps. I've been able to lose weight at different times as a result of using the 12 steps and applying them to my life. And I never had to pick up after I attended that first meeting. And I know there's a lot of addicts. We go through what we have to go through to finally get clean. For me, I found a way that I never had to pick up again. And I believe even today, 32 years later, that even if I feel like my back is up against a wall, I have that recovery program and those steps that I can use to not pick up. Now, as a result of that, almost abandoning my children, my kids, actually, I drove around with my kids when I was under the influence after they already lost their father. As a result of that, and they know my whole story, they allow me to do things over again. They allow me with their kids to drive their kids. They trust me. I've been able to relive a lot of those things that I didn't remember from my addiction when I was caught in the grip. I've been able to relive those. I've been able to become employed. I've worked in the higher education system for more than 26 years now, getting ready to retire next year, actually. And I have 15 grandchildren, and I was able to go back to school and, attend college and obtain a master's degree in leadership. And one of the biggest things I've taken away from Narcotics Anonymous that I still am passionate about today, they told us we couldn't keep what we had unless we give it away. And that's about sponsorship. It's about carrying the message, like Les was saying, to the addict who still suffers. That's why we go into hospitals and institutions. That's why we do public information work where we go out and we tell other people about Narcotics Anonymous. And you're so right, Mario, there's a lot of different avenues to recovery these days, and whatever works for you. But I found a program that has worked for me. And sometimes we just tell people, if it worked for me, it can surely work for you. And so we carry that message. And I really, truly believe that I won't be able to stay clean unless I continue to carry that message. So thank you so much for allowing me to share a little bit about my story and to help to dispel the myths surrounding Narcotics Anonymous. Without Narcotics Anonymous, I wouldn't be here today. Thank you.
And you bet. And you still attend meetings? It sounds
I certainly do.
Yeah, it's when you said, it's just part of your life now.
It is.
And how awesome is that what you missed out on back when you were, in the throes of your addiction, you now are trusted so much by your kids that you're out taking them to places. I couldn't help but note when you were saying that, the big smile that broke out on your face, Marianne. And I just can't thank you enough for sharing your story. And so one more thing though, so just to reiterate, you mentioned this in your story, but you started at AA, yes?
Yes.
And then you gravitated to NA. Okay.
And even today, because of that early time in AA, and because a lot of addicts at that time with only 2 fellowships in my little town, they went to both fellowships like that. And I did the same thing until I found that home in Narcotics Anonymous. And I found that I didn't have to go to more than 1 fellowship because those 12 steps from Narcotics Anonymous, I can apply to other areas of my life. I just haven't found the need myself.
Yeah, and the point here to those of you in recovery is, if something doesn't resonate with you, keep looking, okay? And you will find it. You will find it. And I wanted to go back. One of the things that Chris mentioned was that article. One of the last pages of his presentation was an article on why, and I'm paraphrasing here, but why NA appears to get a bum rap, for lack of a better way of putting it. One of the research scientists on Chris's list was Dr. John Kelly. He's from Harvard. And if anybody knows Dr. Kelly, let me know. I want to get him as a guest speaker. He's got overwhelming evidence to support the value that AA and NA bring to battling the disease of addiction. And so, the cost savings to the healthcare system, it relieves a tremendous burden on hospitals. And it's fascinating to hear him speak. So I just wanted to add that in. But Marianne, congratulations and thank you for sharing your story. Yeah. Crystal, talk to us about Crystal.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Crystal. I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction. So my story really resonates both with Les and Marianne. My disease probably started very similar to everyone else's, right? But I think it's important to note that I come from a place where I didn't see myself growing up. I didn't see people getting sober or clean, right? Everyone that I knew used something. I just thought that I used it differently. I remember distinctly seeing people in the community use, and they were able to get up and go to work every day, and I couldn't, right? So I come from a lineage of addicts, right? My mother, my father, my grandparents, and no one ever got sober or clean. And so 2011, I had enough, and I found a local treatment center in Ypsilanti, and I went there. And I remember having my intake, and the guy asked the intake coordinator, or the owner, the intake person asked me, well, what do you want to do? Said, I just want to learn to smoke weed and drink alcohol and leave the other stuff alone. And he was like, yeah, you need to stay here. 93 days later, and now 11 years later, here we are. And for me, I got sober a lot sooner than I got clean, right? So as soon as I went into that recovery community in Washtenaw County, I was brought up in AA. I went to AA meetings every day for the first 93 days. And then sometimes, like let's say 2 and 3 times a day thereafter. And right about 3 years sober, I was having a really bad day. There just happened not to be an AA meeting in the area. And I knew someone from the church that I attended that went to NA. And so I show up at an NA meeting in a church basement on a Friday at 8:00. And when I got there, as soon as I walked in the door, I got hugs, right? And I remember feeling so welcome and so like I belong there, right? They gave me a book there, and they told me, don't worry about it. And they let me go home with this book. And I was just like, what in the world? And so at first I would go to both meetings. And it wasn't very long before I started going to NA on a regular and consistent basis. I got a sponsor. I worked some steps. And I think one of the most important pieces of that was that I share all the time when I share my story with others that I got sober long before I got clean, right? For me, I needed AA. That was what I was taught. That's what I learned. It wasn't until I ventured off after a few years, in recovery, that I found out that NA even existed, right? And so I started attending NA meetings, and it was there that I met my husband. It was there that I learned the fundamentals of recovery. It was there that I went to my first convention, and it was there that I started to get with the women in recovery, right? So now looking back on my story, I've got 11 years I got 10 years and like 8 months. Let me not get too ahead of myself, right? I got 10 years and 8 months of this process. And in this process, I've gotten married. I've had some additional children. The principles of Narcotics Anonymous is what has allowed me to move my mother into my home and be able to take care of her as she gets older. It's the principles of recovery, the principles of Narcotics Anonymous that have allowed me to help other addicts, that have allowed me to be a beacon of hope for those. I'm able now to go back into my community, and I don't even tell people that I'm in Narcotics Anonymous. I don't tell them how I got clean unless they ask me. But when I go into my community today, I'm a totally different human being, and I give respect where respect is due. And let me just tell you, for me, Alcoholics Anonymous played a tremendous role in my recovery. It gave me the structure and the foundation that I needed. But for me, when I found Narcotics Anonymous, that is when I found my recovery home, right? And I work in the recovery community in Washtenaw County, and I tell people all the time, go to what works. When people come to me in treatment and they say to me, I went to a meeting, and sometimes it's AA, sometimes it's NA, and they say, I went to a meeting and, people were saying this or the God thing or whatever reason they say for not going to a meeting. I just tell them, well, you know what, why don't you try another meeting? Here's a list of them in your area, right? The meetings are there to help you. And if you don't feel at home there, if you don't feel the support that you need there, then leave the meeting and walk to another one, go to another one. You know what I mean? And so for me, I am able to attend both meetings. My home group, my home base is Narcotics Anonymous. But in this community, if someone asks me to go with them to a meeting, I do have a sponsee who happens to attend AA. She went to a treatment center, the same place I did, where I still do service work, right? And so I attend AA meetings with her on occasion. I just recently presented her with her first year of sobriety, and I did that at an AA meeting. In turn, she's gone to an NA meeting with me. And so I think it's important, and what I want people to understand is that it's no right or wrong way to do things, right? It's no, AA isn't better or worse than the NA, and neither is NA, right? I think it's the most important piece of this, at least for me, is that I have to do what works for me, and for me, when I walked into that Narcotics Anonymous meeting, that first meeting, and I got that hug, it was life-changing, right? Now, I do know that some people come here from this early recovery, especially with a lot of trauma. And so if the hugs aren't for you, you can just shake hands or just wave. You're not required to get a hug, but they are there if you need them. And if anyone knows Les, he gives the best Narcotics Anonymous hugs ever known to man. And for me, Narcotics Anonymous really laid the foundation of how to be myself in recovery. One of the things that Chris mentioned in his presentation was the demographic differences, and for me, and this is only my story, not anyone else's, but for me, I found a lot of commonalities in a lot of different ways, not just race and ethnicity, but also in social areas, right? I found a lot of similarities that I could resonate with. And I heard my story over and over and over again. And so because of Narcotics Anonymous, like I said, I'm married. I've got 4 amazing young men that I'm raising. I have my own private practice where I do my best to help other addicts in recovery, right? I help folks to get their driver's license back. Like, I present whenever I can. And at this point, I just accepted a full-time position with Eastern Michigan University in their School of Social Work. I'm a PhD student now. When I got here into recovery, I didn't have any degrees other than a high school diploma. And since then, I've gotten a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and now working on a PhD. And one of my areas of study is recovery. I want to give back to the recovery community so much of what was given to me. So Mario, thank you for having this forum. I think it's really important to open up the floodgates to recovery to people and let them know that recovery exists, right? I think it's important to let people know that there are multiple pathways to recovery and that whatever works for you, we're here to have it. In my community where I came from, I now know what those churches were doing late at night when people were smoking cigarettes outside the door. Like in Chris's presentation, they had a sign out. But in recovery today, like, we're anonymous, and so people don't know. And so, Mario, for you to have this forum and for you to use something as non-anonymous as Facebook, of all places, to present this, I think it just speaks volumes to where we are and where we can go. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Crystal. And what is your PhD in? I know you said that a part of it is recovery, but what are you?
So my PhD is going to be in higher education, and I want to look at trauma. As you know, there's a lot of trauma that comes in and out these doors of Narcotics Anonymous and in and out of these doors of recovery. Let me say that. And it's not just the trauma that we come in the doors with, or not just the trauma that we suffer before our addiction, but oftentimes we come into our addiction and we cause ourselves undue trauma. So trying to heal that trauma and then how it relates to us being able to get educational, to have higher education as our goal, and then be able to sustain it.
Awesome. Crystal, thank you. You're incredible. All of you guys are incredible. You know, I told these panelists, and I tell people all the time, that I learn the most about the disease of addiction from people who have battled the disease and have ended up like Chris and Les and Marianne and Rhett and Crystal. So this is an eye opener for me. Crystal, I thought I knew you pretty well, but now I know you even better. So just very appreciative that you elected to share your story. And look up, if you know, Crystal mentioned she does work in our community. Do people just Google you to find you, Crystal?
For sure, they can just Google First Step Referral Services.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, we're
So, yep. Okay, Rhett, you're the primary reason this meeting is happening. I can't thank you enough for chasing me down and saying, hey, we got to do this. And this is important. And why don't you share your story? Your role in the community is particularly interesting. The way you give back, everybody here gives back, but you're involved in the court system, yes?
Yes, sir. And thank you for having me, Mario. I appreciate this opportunity for allowing this topic to be on the fan platform, and Chris for presenting that wonderful presentation. If you haven't seen that full presentation of Chris, I highly suggest you check out. There's a lot of information.
It's on YouTube, right? Rhett, you can see the full prezo on YouTube.
I believe so, correct, Chris.
Yeah.
I've seen it in person and watched it online and can't get enough of it. But to answer your question, Mario, yeah, I do work at. I have the privilege to be the program coordinator at 14B District Court Recovery Court Program under the Honorable Judge Elaine Washington and Magistrate Mark Nelson. It's an avenue where we have people who've been struggling with addiction and committing crimes, nonviolent misdemeanor crimes that's tied in with their addiction, from retail fraud, larceny, DUIs, and they get a chance to come into our program and receive services of treatment as opposed to going to jail. Because we find that, when people are exposed to treatment, they have a higher success rate of staying clean as opposed to just going to jail for a year or two and coming back out untreated. I'm also the owner of First Step Referral Service, which also provides counseling and preventive services to the community. But Mario, you said something, me chasing you down, but it was actually you that, sparked this idea, because, you had a meeting with myself and several other people at the court. And I've known you for some years. We've known each other in passing. And I always respected your passion of trying to break down the barriers of stigma, right? And trying to educate the people outside of the 12-step community, outside of the addict or alcoholic who's suffering with a particular substance, and try to reach the people from a position to educate them, to let them know these people are sick. They're not morally deficient, right? They're critically ill. They're not bad, right? And so when you came and presented what you're trying to do and looking for topics, this immediately kind of popped in my head, because I know a lot of times we start from the top up and work our way down to deal with stigma. But a lot of times we have a lot of stigma in our own grassroots community, where we have people based on previous experiences or rumors, or like, this topic, dispel of myths, where, we tell people, they don't go to those meetings, don't do this. And I think, Chris, you made an excellent point on those misconceptions that you brought up about the program. And those things become truth, right? After all, you keep telling something long enough, it eventually becomes the truth. And I can't tell you how many times I sat in rooms with my peers, with other people in the recovery community who are sometimes uneducated about Narcotics Anonymous, or they have their own personal opinion about it, and they kind of treat it as gospel and a blanket statement for everybody. So a little bit about me, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm a recovering addict. Um, I got introduced to Narcotics Anonymous in 2010 through a treatment center. And I think about, when I got to that treatment center, the therapist who I did my intake with suggested and gave me a book called The Basic Text, which is the literature for Narcotics Anonymous. And I think back on this day, almost 12 years ago, where thank God no one told that counselor that this program doesn't work. Thank God somebody never told that counselor, hey, don't send none of your clients here or you're going to have a very high success rate of getting people clean. That person, that counselor, that therapist who did my intake was open-minded. And they were willing to give me an avenue. And they presented it. And also, thank God that I wasn't tainted with outside opinions from other people who might have tried it or might have or failed or had some kind of misconception about the program. So when I got introduced to Narcotics Anonymous, I was green and I was open-minded to listen to whatever I had to say. But even prior to that, Mario, I used alcohol for a very long time, and all my legal infractions are tied into alcohol. And then when that transpired into drugs, I became very ashamed of my drug problem. I was very ashamed of me. My family knew I had an alcohol problem, but I hid my drug problem because nobody ever said that if you do drugs, you're bad. It's just something I just inherently knew, right? Chris kind of talked about that criminality aspect of it, that deviancy of it. It's just, you watch the news. In my community, I grew up during the crack epidemic. It ravaged my neighborhood. It destroyed families. I knew nobody that got clean, and nobody was coming to the community saying that, you don't have to do this anymore. It was, there was recovery in Detroit, don't get me wrong, but it just wasn't openly available. And that information wasn't widely conveyed. So I had my own biases about addiction and what it was, and I was very confused about what addiction was. I thought it was something wrong with me, and I hid it. And by me hiding, it kept me sick for many years, right? In Narcotics Anonymous, there's a piece of literature that states our secrets keep us sick, right? And by me not telling people what was going on and just giving them the alcohol story and not the full addiction problem that I was suffering from, I was only getting limited treatment in a certain area. And I've never really touched on the problem. And it wasn't so multiple times over and over, I banged my head against the wall, hiding the fact that I had a drug problem because I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I went to AA at 15 years old, court ordered. I could not relate to it. Fast forward, when I got introduced back by that therapist, I was a lot more open-minded, willing to try to do whatever I needed to save my life. And I remember going to meetings. And also, let me say this, even though I was willing to go to the Narcotics Anonymous meetings, I still looked at it as I failed. I looked at it as a place where, this is something bad to be going to these meetings. And it wasn't over time when I gone to show that it's not about sitting around telling war stories of how we use. It's about getting hope and trying to find out how you get better. There's a passage out of the Basic Text that says, our only hope is to follow those who have faced our dilemma and found a way out, right? And when I started to sit there and listen to the Les of the meetings and Mary Ann's of the meetings, and I listen to them share their experience, strength, and hope of how they got better, and I was able to follow that blueprint, and I was able to continue to keep coming to meetings, and it wasn't an overnight success. I struggled for many years in a program of slowly relapsing, going back out, coming back, starting over again. But one thing I can always say, I always kept trying, right? And I never got discouraged. And, I got discouraged, but I always kept trying. And eventually I started doing what the other people were doing, and it got successful. When I go to an NA meeting, a guy whispered in my first NA meeting, he said, try to identify, not to compare. Because I wanted to disassociate myself with these people here, because I, again, thought the addiction of using drugs was something bad, right? These are sick junkies, robbing thieves. That's not me. I got a job. I do this. I work. And I would disqualify myself. But when I started to listen to the people share their stories, and I started to hear my story, And I got past the ignorance of the stereotyping and the blanket statements that I threw against everybody in the program. I started to see and get hope that I can recover too. And then eventually I did. You know, I got married in this program. I had my first children in this program. I rebuilt bridges with my family that I destroyed over the years by my active addiction. The crime rate slowly started to climb when I got clean. You know, it's just these things just start to happen over and over. You know, I went to school, finished my degrees. Um, you know, I used to do IT for 20 years, and when I got an NA, I found a passion for helping other addicts, and I left that job of IT and went into an entry-level job at a detox center. And I never went back to work again because I finally found something I truly love, you know, is listening and helping a suffering addict. And that's part of the fifth tradition of Narcotics Anonymous. Our primary purpose is one, to stay clean, but also to help the addict who still suffers. You know, so that's the reason I wanted to suggest this to you, Mario, because you said, you know, we need a lot of quivers in our, you know, out here and ammo. There's a lot of skin in the game for people that's addicted to drugs, right? We need to give them every avenue to recover. And by me getting the ability to sit there with a therapist and be suggested to go to Narcotics Anonymous, she didn't denounce any other group. She just said, hey, this sounds like it may work for you. And she allowed me to form my own opinion. I'm able to do that for my clients today, my sponsors, or anybody else. You know, I can't say what won't work for you. There's meetings and programs I've been to that I don't really care for, you know, but that doesn't mean that you may not like it. We're all individually different. So I try to encourage people, I think Chris has said it too, go wherever is going to save your life. Go wherever is going, when you walk in a room, people don't drop their head of shame when they look at you. You know, people are burying their children, we're dying. I mean, and it doesn't have to happen. Addiction is a very treatable disease. It's a treatable disease.
And yet, Rhett, most people don't get treated.
They don't get treated. And what a shame to deny somebody an accident. It's like it saves somebody, you know, a diabetic, and you don't tell them about insulin or metformin, right? You know, you keep that away from, or your doctor say, oh, I'm not really too keen on that, right? Based on their own opinion, right? So it's like, it's a treatable disease. The stakes are very high. It's a deadly disease. Let's give someone any opportunity can to get better. Narcotics Anonymous works, period.
Rhett, when we met on Friday to talk about what we're doing here now, you mentioned your family and how it's fraught with, I think it was you, the disease of addiction. Maybe might have been one of the other panelists, but was that true in your case? Or was it a different panelist that your other people in your family are battling the disease of addiction, or no?
Well, yeah, I do have family members that struggle.
Okay.
You know, I do have family members who have actually gotten better and got help because I got help.
Yeah, I don't mean they're still struggling. I just mean this has been a part of your life for what you mentioned 15 when you were
yeah, I mean, yeah, my using and my abusing started at a very early age, and I got court ordered in Detroit to my first AA meeting at 15. So it goes a long way, you know.
Rhett, what was that? You said something that I thought would be good on the front of a t-shirt. Our lies keep us, what was that you said?
Our secrets keep us sick.
Our secrets keep us sick on the front of the t-shirt, and on the back is a big NA. That would be a good t-shirt. Our secrets keep us sick. And I'll tell you, in no other area is that more true than when you are trying to recover from the disease that is addiction. And, you know,
and if I could, you know, just to build off that, secrets of not discussing the drug problem, or the secret of being in a toxic relationship with somebody still using, the secret that, you know, I may have paraphernalia still in my house. I mean, the secret could be anything, right? And being vulnerable and being honest. Honesty is the antidote to addiction, right? When I'm honest, I'm able to open the doors to get some help. right? But if I'm dishonest, those doors stays closed and nobody knows I need help and I suffer, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you to all of you for sharing your story. And I'm trying to think if we've got any questions here. John, I'm going to put, Angela, will you put my email in the ESH prefix in there for John? I just want to make sure he gets it. And John, if you email me, I will make certain that you get I'll email you personally the link to Chris's presentation. And Chris, we will make sure that we post, if you email me the longer version of your presentation, I'll make sure that everybody gets both the longer presentation and the truncated version that you were kind enough to prepare specifically for today's presentation. John, there's my email. There, Chris. Okay. Angela, if you could take that and get it to me, and I'll make sure that Bill includes that in our email blast. But did any of you have any questions for anyone on our panel today? This is around when we typically wrap up, but Crystal says thank you. And again, Rhett, gosh, I don't know when you reached out to me. It was in the winter. I know that. And Brandon, will you put in there the link to the survey again, just so no one forgets about that? And, when Rhett talked about one of the reasons he reached out to me, it's because he told you what I'm about to tell you now. There's the link to the survey. Please fill that out and let us know your thoughts, because we use it to improve the quality of our meetings, to improve the quality of everything we do. But I told Rhett, and I'm telling everyone here, if you see something going on anywhere in the country that's helping people battle the disease of addiction, bring it to Wash and Off Fan. We'll take a look at it. And if it makes sense, we'll give that program Rhett's idea about talking about Narcotics Anonymous. We'll give you the forum here at Wash and Off Fan to share your story, to spread your experience, strength, and hope so that others might learn. And so with that, just thank you, Les, Crystal, Chris, Marianne, and Rhett for bringing this wonderful topic to our family forum. And remember, all of you who are here, free pizza, pop, water at the Freight House in Ypsilanti. It's our new venue, our first face-to-face meeting in 2.5 years. And we are going to share wonderful things that are happening in our community relative to recovery. And we're going to share our stories for the entire duration of the meeting. So with that, I appreciate all of you. Thank you, and take care until next month. We'll see.
Mario, what time is that meeting?
That meeting is at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock at the Freight House in Depot Town. Les, I'm glad you brought this up, because I don't know if I think it was Marianne that said you give great hugs, and hugs are good medicine for me. Okay, so yes, so you go ahead and give me a big hug if you can make it there. I think it's the second Monday of August, which I believe is the 8th. Don't quote me on that, but it's 7 o'clock. And if you want pizza, I think the doors are, I think we're going to probably open at 6:30 p.m. So, okay. Is it for the family? Hang on. Is it for family, or is this an NA meeting? No, it's for the community at large, not just families. It's for everyone, people in recovery, families and friends of people in recovery. And just so everyone knows, the breakdown on a fan, Washtenaw fan meeting anyway, it's about a third people in recovery, a third families and friends of people in recovery, and a third professors from the University of Michigan. People like Crystal who are pursuing their PhD. In Crystal's case, it's at Eastern Michigan. It's blue collar, it's white collar. And you know, the thing that's incredible about fan meetings is we get that kind of diversity. So anyway, Les, were you going to add something? No? Okay. Well, look, everyone, I hope you can make it, help spread the word about that next meeting. It's going to be awesome. And thank you, everyone. Take care.